Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Skull Servant Yu-Gi-Oh deck profile for July 2022. I've always been a big fan of the Skull Servant deck. It's probably one of my favorite zombie decks of all time in Yu-Gi-Oh, just for its playstyle being to fill up the graveyard with the many different Skull Servant cards, and then have your King of the Skull Servants become a monster of a monster on the field with some pretty crazy attack, and just the overall playstyle. We've gotten the white baking back during the Blazing Vortex, and I always like to keep the deck up to date with any of the changes that I make for its playstyle. It's definitely a going second deck, with its main focus being to swing into your opponent for some pretty big numbers. So that's what you want to remember when looking at this deck profile. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for the Skull Servant monsters, we'll go ahead and start off with our main go-to one, which is the original one, Skull Servant. All the cards are focused on this card becoming its name while in the graveyard. Just having 3 of the original copies just helps for more graveyard setup with all your other different cards you run in the deck, because your main go-to boss monster that we run in the deck is King of the Skull Servants. The original attack of this card is the combined number of King of the Skull Servants and Skull Servant in your graveyard times 1,000. And when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other King of the Skull Servants or one Skull Servant from your graveyard to special summon this card, keeping this card on the field for all the following turns. If your opponent tries to get over this card, you at least have that resource available to you. So you want 3 of this card so you can also potentially get multiple copies of this powerhouse on the field, because there are plenty of other different named monsters that become Skull Servant in the graveyard, including White Baking, which we are also running 3 copies of. You'll find that a similar theme with the whole deck profile for the Skull Servants and the numbers we run for the many monsters. With White Baking, this card's name becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. If a level 3 or lower zombie monster you control be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can discard this card instead. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add 2 monsters with different names from your deck to your hand, except for White Baking, that are either Skull Servant or specifically list Skull Servant in its text, giving you search power for all the other members of this archetype to your hand to use because of this card. I also run 3 Lady in White as more of a protective card. Face up level 3 or lower zombie monsters on the field, except Lady in White cannot be destroyed by battle and are unaffected by spell and trap effects. This card becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard, giving you more of a protection against your attacks you'll want to use with your King of the Skull Servant by having the Lady in White on the field to protect you from battle from those cards. And I also run, additionally, for some of our numbers, 3 White Mare. One of the more harder to get, cards to the Skull Servant deck for quite a while, but really affordable now just with its reprint it's had throughout the years. And with White Mare, this card name becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. You can discard this card, then activate one of the following effects. You can target one of your banished Skull Servant or White Mare, return it to the graveyard, or you can target one of your banished Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants and special summon it. Giving you a special summon off of one card is a big plus, because you want to be able to special summon your King of the Skull Servant as quickly as you can to the field after you set up your graveyard with all your other different cards. And then for the last couple Skull Servant cards, I also run 3 White Princess. With this card, this card's name becomes Skull Servant while it's in the graveyard. If this card is normal or special summon, you can send 1 White Prince from your deck to the graveyard. And during the player's turn, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. All monsters currently on the field lose attack and defense equal to their own level or rank times 300 till the end of this turn. So this is so you can have a more powerhouse King of the Skull Servants on the field to use against your opponent, having their opponent's attack points of their monsters lowered, so you can just swing into them for hopefully the potential game-winning points. And then for the last of the Skull Servant family cards, 3 White Prince as well. This card is sent to the graveyard. You can send 1 Skull Servant and 1 Lady in White from your hand and or deck to the graveyard. You can banish 2 Skull Servants and this card in your graveyard to special summon 1 King of the Skull Servants from your deck, and this card's name becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. So you send it to the graveyard with your White Princess, and in return you get an additional send of a Skull Servant and Lady in White from your hand or deck to the graveyard, giving you also what you need to just special summon out the King of the Skull Servant if you need. But otherwise, it's just 3 additional sends thanks to White Princess to the graveyard to give your King of the Skull Servants on the field 3,000 attack just from those 3 monsters. For more of the generic zombie support that I also run the deck, I also run 3 Mizuki. This is another option for special summoning your King of the Skull Servants from the graveyard back onto the field just by banishing your Mizuki from the graveyard, target a zombie in your graveyard, and special summon it. So as long as Mizuki's in the graveyard, you have that special summon for, once again, your boss monster back onto the field. I also run 2 Unizombie and 1 Plague Spreader Zombie for some additional tuner plays, so we can go into some of our synchro options that I have in the extra deck as well. Plague Spreader being more of a special summon option onto the field when it's in the graveyard, by placing 1 card on the top of your deck from your hand, and then with Unizombie being able to target 1 face-up monster in the field, discard 1 card, and increase that target's level by 1, giving you level adjustments for some of your other plays in the deck, but also being able to, with this card, once you can send 1 zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard to increase the target's level by 1, giving you options for whatever zombie monster you may want to send to the graveyard to then benefit off of your Unizombie and that additional monster you sent. And that is it for the main deck monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. I'm running 2 Symbol of Heritage. This is my first go-to spell for special summoning. You can only activate this card while there are 3 monsters with the same name in your graveyard. You select one of those monsters, special summon it to your side of the field, and equip it with this card. This is just a faster way for you to summon out your King of the Skull Servants onto the field once you have your 3 set up in the graveyard for the play. Giving you that play also just gives you more incentive to special summon this card back onto the field, because it has to be the same name. Otherwise, all the other cards would just be Skull Servant in the graveyard, so you would have to summon out one of them. But King of the Skull Servants doesn't have this specification for its own card name, but you can easily set up 3 of this card in the graveyard, then just have your other target being Symbol of Heritage to summon it back onto the field. I also run 2 Regeki and 2 Twin Twister. Now, taking out back row or clearing, monsters you can't get over through just attacks on the field is also important due to the Skull Servant play and being a Ghost second deck. So you just need a little more back row removal. Normally what would be side deck for a lot of decks is main deck in this deck, so you have those options available to you to then just swing with your big numbered King of the Skull Servants into your opponent for game. For more draw power as well, I run 3 Allura Darkness. Just having some multiples of the particular Skull Servant cards in your hand can be banished for the cost of this card to draw into more important cards for the deck altogether. And for the 1-ofs for these spells and the rest of the main deck, I run 1 Burial from the Different Dimension, 1 1-for-1, 1 Foolish Burial, and 1 Monster Reborn, with Monster Reborn and 1-for-1 being great ways to special summon your level 1 monsters back onto the field, or even just from the deck. Foolish Burial setting up more cards in the graveyard as well for when it is sent to the graveyard with your White Prince. That's the 1 send there for your setup. And then Burial from the Different Dimension, so you can recycle some of your banished Skull Servants back into the graveyard to not only give you options for banishing with cards like White Prince to use over again, but to also just make your King of the Skull Servants that much more stronger on the field. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. The extra deck is pretty generic just for the setup, but we are running a Link 1 lineup that's easy to summon out with Salmon Great Almirage, Link Karibo, and 1 Relinquished Anima. For the Link 1 options, to also just set up our Skull Servants in the graveyard that much more quickly. For the Link 2s, 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice, 1 the Dark Charmer Gloomy, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, and 1 Nightmare Cerberus, along with 1 Underclock Taker, 1 Barricade Board Blocker, and then for the bigger Link monsters, I run 1 Access Code Talker, 1 Boral Sword Dragon, and 1 Apollosa for more of the heavy hit plays that you can utilize the extra deck for. For some of the other monsters, for synchros, I run 1 Red Eyes Zombie Dragon. This card gives you options for needing just 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monster to summon out. Being a level 7, you can use Unizombie and one of your other level 4 monsters to go for the synchro play, gaining 100 attack and defense for each zombie monster on the field and in the graveyards. And when another zombie monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon 1 zombie monster from either graveyard to your field, giving you a King of the Skull Servants back into the field by making use of one of your weaker ones that you may have had on the field. And also 1 Borreload Savage Dragon, another synchro option with Unizombie or Plague Spreader to summon out onto the field, and then make use of the Link monsters we had also. With the final monster for the extra deck just being 1 Leviair the Sea Dragon, you have Unizombie, White Princess, and Lady in White, all options to make a rank 3 monster to then special summon back one of your banished cards that you could have banished, whether it be from your White Prince or from your King of the Skull Servants, banishing to protect it from being destroyed by battle. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, setting up the King of the Skull Servants is a big one at that. So you need that send power, being able to rely on your zombies or any of the other generic spells we run in the deck to set up your graveyard. We'll come down to it, especially with White Prince, if it's sent to the graveyard, being able to send one Skull Servant monster, and then additionally one Lady in White from your deck to the graveyard. Gives you those 3 monsters, and also just the banish cost to potentially summon out your King of the Skull Servants onto the field. If you have cards like your Barrow from a different dimension, you can return all these cards to the graveyard, setting up the attack for your King of the Skull Servants. But even just from that 1-card play of sending to the graveyard, if you used Foolish Burial or even your White Princess on the field, you can then also use that normal summon option with your White Princess and the summoned King of the Skull Servants to go for an additional Link monster on the field, which will not only boost up the power of your monsters on the field, but then given the option, if you do have a special summon to play, back onto the field, giving you a Skull Servant and additional strength in the graveyard since you sent more Skull Servants to use in there. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy the video. Like I said, Skull Servants are one of my favorite zombie decks, so I always love updating it. I always try to at least once a year, so I felt the deck was definitely due for an update for 2022. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.